Welcome to the first of Minerva's occasional conversations with business leaders and owners who are working through current challenges to build back better businesses. I'm delighted that you're able to join us today and hear from our first guest, Charlie Bigham, founder of Bighams, providers of quality meals prepared in their kitchens in Wales and in London, ready for you to cook at home. So thank you for joining us, Charlie. We recorded an interview with Charlie a short while ago, covering in brief the topics of values, profit, sustainability, certification, business recycling, risk, growth, and the forthcoming Christmas season. Topics that I'm sure will trigger many questions in your minds for you. So please either place your questions in the chat box in full if you'd like us to ask Charlie them, or indicate in the chat that you've got a question that you'd like to put to him during the live Q&A session. And that's going to be in about 30 minutes time. So I think if we're all ready, I think you can all sit back and enjoy the recorded interview that we did with Charlie a short while ago. So please, let's start the video.
So Charlie, what do you believe are the factors that have driven the success of Bighams?
I mean, it's work in progress, but I think, anyone who starts a business, what they probably need first and foremost is a good, healthy dosing of luck, especially with the timing. So I certainly had that. I think persistence is pretty important. But for my business, taking a long-term view, I mean, we're sort of in our 25th year now. We're planning to be around for another 25 years and beyond. Not all businesses take that view, but I think kind of for us, that's really important. Having a pretty clear set of values is important, and it's quite useful if those values are consistent and you manage to communicate them.
Is there a particular value that you would place above all others? That you would signify as something that you've held on to?
Well, I think it goes, and it's not about running a food business. It's about running a business. And I think there are a lot of people who get misled by the media into thinking businesses are there, to make money, to behave badly, to line people's pockets, to rip people off, there are lots of negatives about business. And I think that's depressing because fundamentally, I think business should be, and in most cases is, a force for good, as well as being an absolutely essential and integral part of how society works. I think another thing I've discovered over the years around business, the misconceptions of business, and I see this sometimes, certainly in the early days with my own team, is profit is a bit of a dirty word. And I think that's really odd because actually, what I say to my guys is profit, it's really straightforward. Profit equals freedom. Businesses do need to make profit, because actually it's making that profit that you're able to then have the freedom to make your choices for the future, make investments, take risks, whatever it might be.
So in terms of your business and in terms of COVID and this focus on building back better and sustainability, what do you think has been the biggest challenges that you've had to face?
It seems like a mighty long time ago that we wound the clock back to sort of January, and we were all sitting there kind of reading and listening on the news to this virus outbreak that had happened a long way away. And I think we were all a bit glib about it. Somehow we kidded ourselves that it wasn't going to hit us in the same way here in the UK. We're a complicated business in that we have 450 different fresh ingredients arriving in our 2 kitchens, one in Somerset every morning. We have other things that come from elsewhere in the world. The first thing we had to do is we had to look, take a deep look into our supply chain. As things happened in China, we were already looking at saying, gosh, what do we buy from China? What might be affected here? So we were looking at that in January. And then obviously as things moved to Italy, we buy quite a lot of ingredients from Italy, and actually especially from the north of Italy where they were hit really hard early on. As the virus gathered momentum and went into more countries, it affected more and more of what we bought. And then as it came came into the UK, it started to have knock-on impacts. You know, for example, a lot of our suppliers in the UK have significant bits of their business supplying the restaurant trade, the food service market, and as we all know, that's taken a terrible hit. So there have been many, many ramifications, and they are by no means over.
So has those changes, has that actually impacted on perhaps your drive to actually make your business as sustainable as possible? Has it meant that you'd have to change anything significantly as a result of COVID?
No, I don't think so. From a supply chain point of view, you know, a lot of the work the team had to do was planning and understanding and thinking, well, there might be a risk here. I'm very pleased to say that for the most part, we did a lot of planning and we actually had to do very little, because I think one thing that we've all learned through these pretty tough, 9 months or whatever it is, 10 months now, is how amazingly adaptable we all are as people, as businesses, as communities. So I think it's been really encouraging actually to see how adaptable people have been. And therefore we've had to change, we've had to do lots of work, but we haven't actually changed much. And I think, to me, sustainability is not something that it just comes up when there's a crisis. It's something that kind of underpins everything. And kind of going back to what business is for. You cannot, our aspiration is to be a good business. You cannot possibly hope to be a good business if you're not sustainable.
What are Bighams doing in that regard? What have you put in place in order to drive that modern sustainability?
Well, I'm very proud that it's always been pretty high on our agenda. I think if you take the longer the term view you take as a business, the more these things are going to be important. And we take a very long-term view as a business, and so these things have always been important and will always be important. I'm absolutely delighted that they've sort of moved up the agenda in the sort of collective psyche of importance. Yeah, we were very early on. I think it was, probably 15 years ago, we looked at the food we make. We make food which is pre-prepared, and that has to be packaged in something to get from our kitchens to consumers' kitchens. And the sort of default packaging is a plastic tray of some description, or plastic container of some description. I looked at that and I kind of thought, well, plastic doesn't represent what we're trying to do. It doesn't feel nice, but also it's fundamentally wrong. Plastic is not a good thing. So 15 years ago, we started looking for alternatives and actually launched our food into being packed in wooden containers, which are made from fast-growing poplar, which is harvested from accredited sustainable forests, and there's a very sort of nice and completely sustainable loop around our packaging.
So in terms of your internal arrangements, regarding recycling and perhaps reuse and reducing waste, are there any particular strategies or practices that you've put into place in order to establish that?
Well, I do think when it comes to recycling, businesses like mine, and I suspect many others, have a particular responsibility to really lead the way. And that's partly just a kind of basic, question of economics. Actually, collecting recycling from the home. I mean, we all do it, and it's important, and we should do it. But it's quite difficult. The inefficiencies of collecting from people's homes is quite hard. We have 2 pretty busy kitchens. We make quite a lot of food, and that means actually, a sort of a side effect of that is we produce quite a lot of material, waste material, which we can very sensibly stream into. I think we do it into about 14 different streams, and we can segregate it and clean it, and we can recycle it in a really responsible and meaningful way. We send from our kitchen down in Somerset, we're sending now, I think, pushing towards an articulated lorry. That's 26 pallets, one of those big lorries you see driving down the road. We send a full lorry load of stuff to be recycled, whether that's plastic containers, tin cans, there's a whole load of stuff. That's one thing, that's one bit of our recycling, and it's not even all of it. So that really makes an impact.
Yes, because obviously volume of waste streams or residues, as we're supposed to call them now, because they can be utilised in other ways, it's actually getting the volume up, actually, isn't it, for a lot of these streams in order to make them usable? Yeah.
Yeah, and part of the choice we've made as a business is, as we've grown, we've said, let's turn that to an advantage. Let, you know, on the recycling front, let's use that as a way to become better at what we do, not just carry on the way doing it when we're small. Well, the most important thing with energy use is to measure it. You know, you can't, and we all know that old adage, you can't really improve something unless you're measuring it. And actually, you know, measuring energy use is not straightforward. Measuring it at quite a granular level. So we're not just interested in what we're using in terms of the total electricity we're using, but we're trying to say, well, where you know, which bits of the kitchen or which bits of equipment are using the energy, and then you look at it and look at your high use, and you sort of challenge yourself and you say, okay, well, that seems to be where 90% of the usage is, so what can we do there? And I think, you know, so we measure it, but then once we measure it, we set ourselves quite tough targets in terms of reduction, and then we challenge ourselves to think creatively of how we're going to meet those targets. And we're prepared to invest behind that as well.
Okay, and does the staff team get involved in this and thinking about new ways of doing things or approaching different aspects of the processing that you're doing?
Absolutely. I mean, it's certainly not just me. We've got lots of people. I mean, you know, no surprise, there are lots of people in our business who care very much about recycling and energy reduction and generally becoming more sustainable as a business in those ways. So it's actually, you know, it's a nice, engaging thing to get involved with, because you always find people energized and up for it. And I think, to be fair, I think, yeah, we could do better. I think we've got quite a lot of people involved, but I think there's always an opportunity to get more people involved. And actually, sometimes getting, yeah, well, no, almost always, the more people you have involved, the better.
So do your customers, and I mean, I guess also your B2B customers, as well as your end consumers, do they feedback to you about you know, questions or issues or situations, you know, regarding sustainability and how you're managing that? Do you get much feedback from those quarters about how you're managing the business?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So, I mean, our main customers in terms of B2B are the UK supermarkets. They are all very engaged on this topic, as we all know. And so they're very interested in talking to their suppliers about it and understanding what their suppliers do. You know, and they have ambitious targets of their own. On the whole, I would say we're ahead of the curve, not behind it. And that I don't want to, that might come across as arrogant or complacent, and we're not either of those things. But I just think because we're a relatively small business, we're entrepreneurial, we're quite creative. You know, we're quite quick with decisions. We're not risk averse. We can move quite quickly. And actually also because we're growing quite fast, it's always easier to do these things if we're growing. So we're able to generally, if our customers, the supermarkets have targets they set themselves, our targets tend to be a lot more demanding. I mean, on the consumer side, I think we get quite a lot of nice, you know, pats on the back from people writing into us and saying how brilliant it is. We use, for example, wooden containers to you know, package our food in. And I think, you know, people are interested in it. But, you know, if I'm honest, it's not going to be the number one reason that people buy our food. It's an important sort of extra layer beneath our food tasting.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you're growing. I mean, what are your ambitions in terms of growth? Is it about new markets, or is it about, you know, another kitchen, or in terms of volume? Or is there something you can share on that front?
Well, I think as a business, it's a binary choice. You either grow or you shrink. So we've chosen to grow. It's not growing for growth's sake, and I think there's a sort of right level of growth. You know, we want to do the right thing, and then, you know, we sort of grow. We've been growing pretty consistently at 15% a year, and that's quite a nice level of growth. It means it's very sustainable. I think it means it means there's plenty of opportunity for the team to grow within the business. You know, every 4 or 5 years you look around and actually the business is twice as big, and that means there's great opportunity for people to come and join us and to have hopefully long and fulfilling careers with us, and you know, it can be quite a nice, dynamic and challenging environment. Well, we've got across our 2 kitchens, we employ about 500 people, and we have people from here, there, and everywhere.
Is B Corp for every business?
I think B Corp is very good. You know, we've been aware of B Corp for quite a while. We've looked at it and we've thought about it. You know, it is quite a big administrative burden. There's a cost. I mean, I don't know the exact number, but my guess is it might have cost us £20,000 in paying a fee. I think the fees are related to your size. So for smaller businesses, it might be less. But it actually, you know, it took us probably a year. I mean, they're quite a robust organisation in terms of, you know, it's not just fill in some forms and that's it. It's you go through several rounds of filling in forms and then questions back, etc., and everything is quite carefully. So I think that's good. You know, if you're going to have certification bodies in whatever field, it's good to know that there's a robust process that sits behind it, which means it's rigorous and it's honest. For us, it was actually a lot of the reason we wanted to do it is we wanted to sort of, if you like, affirm a lot of what we've been doing for a long time anyway, with the benefit of it being looked at through a set of external eyes and perhaps, you know, slightly critical eyes than if we looked at it that way. I was very proud, and I know the team were very proud, you know, that we went through the process, and you know, and basically it wasn't like, oh gosh, we've got to change everything we do. It was like, okay, well that's good. Yeah, that's quite good. We're doing a better job there. We're doing not a bad job there in that area. However, also the process of the other reason we wanted to do it, it's given us some positive affirmation, which is always nice. But it's also pointed to where we can take things further, which we will. Yeah, it's not. We're not interested. Whenever we go for any sort of external accreditation in whatever area, it's never for us about getting the badge, and that's it. It's the process that's important and the journey. And so what I'm excited about as B Corp is how it's going to make us a better business for the long term.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is B Corp is not terribly well known. It started as an American outfit. It's still in its infancy as a movement, if you like. And so I don't think it resonates hugely with consumers at the moment. And so it was much, much more important for us to do as an internal thing.
Turning to a completely different topic now, obviously, right now, as it always is, but it's really to the fore, you know, the health of the population, you know, is on everybody's lips. But what do you think about the fact that the availability of, you know, pre-prepared meals is perhaps detracting, you know, from everybody's ability to actually cook for themselves and be more adventurous in terms of the food that they cook? Do you have a view about that, or is it something that it is considered within the business, and whether you get any feedback regarding that in terms of you know, the nature of your business?
I mean, you know, the whole thing of food and nutrition is a complicated and nuanced thing, and actually, I think the science is there's some very interesting debates around the science of nutrition as well. I suppose for us, you know, one of our challenges as a business is we are making prepared food in a market where the most prepared food is horrible, nutritionally deficient, and you know, we should be eating less and less of it. And suddenly we come in, you know, and I'm kind of, in some ways, the challenge has been right from day one, is we're selling food in a packet to people who, most of our consumers do not want to buy packaged food. So we've got this sort of delicate dance of saying, okay, yes, we are in a packet, but we're different. You know, we do not do these things that other people do. We do it properly. All we're doing is we're cooking as we would at home, but we're doing it with care and attention, small batches, with real pride and care. Be very careful about everything, you know, every ingredient. So it's a challenge. Fundamentally, what we believe as a business is you've got to be careful with the ingredients,
Yes.
where they come from, who they come from, how they're produced. Then you've got to be careful what you do with those ingredients. But I also think the other element that never kind of doesn't get quite enough attention is, you know, food in my book, in our book as a business, is not about just feeding the body, it's also feeding the soul. Food has this incredibly important role to play in our lives, in society. It's what pulls us together. It's, yeah, all the big things, the important things happen in life around food. When people are born, they eat bread together. When people have birthdays, that's what we do. When people get married, it's just an intrinsic part of our culture and who we are and how we interact. And it's one of the great things I miss at the moment. You know,
I know that you did a very interesting and hopefully from your viewpoint successful, you know, online session a little while ago, where you actually showed different chefs creating different food. Is that a kind of exercise that you're thinking that you will continue doing? Is it an initiative that worked for you as a business?
It was fantastic fun. So for those of you who don't know about this, we did a virtual banquet. This was a few months ago, part of the World Food Festival, which is a brilliant organisation of which we're a sort of the major sponsor. And we had a virtual banquet. In the end, we had about 2,000 people who logged on live via Zoom. We had 4 or 5 of the great chefs from the UK, and each cooking, of course. And you know, I just thought it was a brilliant event. You know, the words that came back in our feedback were joy and fun, and you know how rewarding it was. And it was all about sharing food. And at the same time, we were raising money for a brilliant charity called Chefs in Schools, which is all about making sure disadvantaged kids, especially, get taught about the importance of food and taught a little bit about food.
Yeah. Going back specifically now to, you know, your focus on the food and ingredients and so on. What about the price point? You know, about your food. When does that come into play in terms of your, you know, development and plans for the foods that you are going to be providing?
Very little, actually, because I think it's one of the great mistakes that we have, that the UK food industry has made, is it's tough. You know, what we hear a lot about is price, and what we don't hear much about is value. And actually, I've always kind of said, you know, value for money is the key thing. So when we're making a new recipe, we say, well, let's just make really great food, and then see what that costs to make, and then we've got to put a little bit on top of that, because we do need to make a profit so we can reinvest in our future with all of that.
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to sell it for. And that has on occasion meant we put something on a supermarket shelf which is much more expensive than the thing sitting next to it. However, because it's more expensive, it doesn't mean it's not better value. We have to make sure the whole time we are offering really good value to people. But that's where our mission is. It's not about price, it's about value for money.
Do you get pushback from the supermarkets? You hinted that you do in terms of the pricing that.
Yeah, sadly, there's a kind of repeat dialogue that price is important, and I just don't believe that.
So you mentioned earlier on about different meals and different ingredients and so on. How do you go about making the decision about any new dish that you are going to bring into the Bighams kitchen?
Well, I mean, it usually starts with a chat, and then once we've kind of said that probably looks good, we might then do a little bit of sort of sensible checking that we kind of think people will want to buy it, and you can do some, you do the clever bit and go and look at the market and say, well, do we think there's an opportunity, etc. Then work out whether we can do it. There are lots of things I'd love to do, but actually we're not set up to be brilliant at making. So then we work out whether we can do it, and if we think it's a good idea, and there's probably some sort of you know, is going to make some sort of sense commercially and work for our customers as well as our consumers, then it's into the kitchen. And, you know, I've got a wonderful team of chefs. And then we start playing around and chefs start getting creative and making dishes. And then we sort of go through an iterative process of tasting and all enjoyable. We do a lot of work internally first. Quite a small team of us, actually. There's probably only half a dozen of us in that team who are directly involved, because we don't really believe in decisions by committee. You know, and the final arbiter of taste, if you like, which is maybe dangerous, is me. But yeah, we do occasionally use external people as well, and that's to kind of just check we haven't got carried away with ourselves internally, got a bit too overexcited and done something which actually isn't right.
What about the latest, you know, the trends where we're seeing vegetarianism and even veganism, you know, coming into the equation? Are you being influenced by those at all?
In terms of what we do, you know, we're trying to make really nice food that people are quite comfortable with buying. We're not trying to really push the boundaries, so we're not trying to chase the zeitgeist of food and do the latest fermented food or this or that or the other. I think the trends you're talking about are bigger trends around eating less meat. And I think that's, for us, the trend is eating less meat rather than being vegetarian or vegan.
Yeah.
Our job, because we sell to supermarkets, we need to have quite broad appeal. I think there are many more people who want to eat less meat than there are who want to become vegan.
Yeah.
And actually, I think that's where we can have a greater impact.
Are you preparing anything special for the Christmas season? Do you do anything that's particularly focused towards Christmas in terms of the food you're providing?
We don't actually do, we don't do a Christmas special or anything like that.
Okay.
What we do is we sell quite a lot of food over Christmas, because you know, quite a lot of people tell us, you know, amidst all the, you know, wonders of Christmas, it's quite nice just occasionally to be able to dip into the fridge and have a meal off, if you like, a meal off from scratch. And that, by the way, is, you know, our sort of core consumer is someone who loves cooking, loves food, and actually cooks from scratch probably quite often, but we are fundamentally seen as a night off, cooking from scratch, but without compromising on the taste or the quality. So I think it will be very, food will be playing an important role for us all. Delighted.
Christmas, is there any advice that you would like to flag up, maybe from your own experience of Christmases past?
Well, I think, you know, I mean, let's try and be positive about this. I think it's almost inevitable we're going to have smaller groups of people meeting this Christmas, and maybe that's an opportunity to do a bit more cooking, because I think sometimes it's quite intimidating if you've got 15 people coming around. Oh my God, this is a nightmare. This is really. But, you know, if you have to reduce to 6 people, well, then you can actually, you know, be a bit more relaxed and enjoy it and take a few more risks and get more of the family involved. On the waste front, I mean, I think, you know, I have appointed myself, you know, waste czar, food waste czar in our house, because I think actually that, you know, through lockdown, when sort of everything became, especially in that sort of first lockdown, when everything was very predictable, like you had everything in your house and you had it meant to be, so you could kind of, it wasn't, oh, we're going to suddenly nip out. So you could be very planned and actually really get your food waste down to almost zero, I think, and partly by being a bit creative with cooking. I love doing that. I love opening the fridge and thinking, okay, well, that's what's in the fridge. But my idea, if people want a practical idea for avoiding food waste over Christmas, get to a point when you've got a few leftovers, and then have, however many people are in your house, have a tapas competition. And I've done that before with you know, a kind of house full of people, and it's brilliant fun. And suddenly you turn around and all those leftovers are gone.
Yeah, good, Charlie. I think we'll finish it there. That's absolutely brilliant.
Thank you very much, Charlie, for giving us that recording a bit earlier on, and we really look forward to hearing how people are going to cope with organising family and guest tapas sessions. Perhaps anybody who does decide to do that, they'd like to send in some photos, both to us perhaps and also to Bighams. Well, you covered many hot topics in that short interview, and many of them obviously are ones that are facing many organisations across many sectors, which I'm sure will be followed up in the Q&A, I'm sure. So if there's a cluster of questions around a topic, we'll try and take those all together so we deal with them in one go. We've got 30 minutes approximately, so let's see how many we can get through. And we've got a couple that were flagged up in the chat. So I think we've got Sarah, who's going to pose her question live to Charlie first.
Hi, Charlie. Hi, Rhonda. Nice to speak to you.
Hi.
Hi, Charlie. I work for a company that's about to do the B Corp accreditation, and I'm really interested. You said it took a year. Why did it take so long, and what were the biggest challenges?
I think sometimes just things take as long as they take, and we weren't really interested in doing the B Corp just to get a badge. I think quite often when you go for these accreditation schemes, it's the process that is more valuable than the sort of end point, if you know what I mean. And obviously the process is, we've started a process around B Corp which will now continue kind of forever. So I think there are different ways of approaching the B Corp. You can say, in my view, slightly cynically, how quickly can we get there? And let's just, change a few words here and there and pretend we do this. And then you can get there quite quickly. But I think if you do it properly in an embedded sort of way, it takes quite a long time.
Thank you.
Any follow-up points, Sarah?
Yeah, so what were the biggest changes you had to make? Because obviously you said it was very easy to put words in to go through it quickly. What was the biggest lesson that you learned, perhaps, about what you do and what you maybe needed to change?
To be honest, we changed very little. It was really, on the whole, an affirmation. What was nice for us is the whole process was very much an affirmation of what we've already done and been doing for many years. However, the process requires you putting some structure around things, and it's not enough to just do the right things. You have to document that you're doing the right things. So we just had a bit of boring paperwork to document stuff. However, the boring paperwork, as is often the case, does have a value. And especially as organisations get bigger, it's useful to be able to track progress. And what I'm excited about the B Corp is actually not necessarily where we are now, but I think it's going to help us to get to a better place in the future.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
This is a topic, I think, in terms of the certification that comes up with smaller businesses a lot. Do we have the resources? Do we have the time? Particularly if we are talking about maybe even micro SMEs, the best kind of accreditation, if you like, to go for. You mentioned, I think, Charlie, that you've done others, that you have other accreditation. Is there any others that you do particularly value in terms of accreditation of the business?
I think these things sort of come, sometimes they come in waves. I remember years ago doing the Investors in People one. I haven't actually heard anybody talking about investors in people for a long time. So I don't know what's happened to investors in people. It was valuable when we did it, and that was probably 15 years ago. It was valuable about putting some structure around, how we recruit and organise people and look after people and, developments and career developments and all of that. So that was valuable at the time. I think all of that has just become embedded in the way of doing things now. And yeah, we do quite a lot of external audits. We do, obviously there are some sort of food safety related ones which are very important, and again, bring some good discipline and checks and balances to our processes. And the other one that I think is very interesting, there's a couple of different organisations that do it, but the sort of good places to work, stroke best companies, I think, where you do sort of quite in-depth anonymous surveys of your whole team, and that gives you some feedback of not how you think you're doing, but actually how your team feel you're doing. Not always the same thing.
No, exactly. Good. I think we've now got Virginia, I think, who's going to ask Charlie a question.
Yes, hi Charlie, Virginia here. Yes, I've just got a question again. It's relating to B Corp certification, and I was interested. I think you made a comment in the interview earlier about the fact that you find it more useful for business to business communication. Now, I'm kind of interested as a consumer. Obviously, I'm interested in the sustainability of products and processes that are used to develop these products, and I'm just wondering, with all the input that you've had into your B Corp certification, whether you feel that it would be useful to show that more prominently on your website, so that actual consumers could look at that and learn from what you've done. I know you've got a video up there, but on your main homepage, there isn't a lot of reference to sustainability. I just wonder what you think about that.
I think, just kind of to repeat maybe what I've already said in a boring way, but I think B Corp is not a very valuable thing for consumers at the moment. It's, you know, I mean, it's not a tiny organisation, but it's not widely known in the UK. Hopefully over time that will change, but at the moment, I don't think you should kid yourselves that it's going to make a lot of difference to consumers. This is just B Corp. I completely take your point about our sustainability. I think we do loads of great things on sustainability, and like quite a lot of the good things that not just us do, but businesses do, sometimes you forget to shout enough about the good things you do. You just sort of take it for granted that's what you're doing. So yes, I think we should be much more upfront, and we should provide much more information on our website about our sustainability and the good stuff we do. But that, to me, comes under a sustainability heading, not a B Corp heading.
Yes, thank you. That's interesting. I mean, I think you're obviously doing great stuff, and it would be really good as a consumer to be able to see that straight away. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So we are working on it. There'll be something out there soon.
Okay, thank you very much.
I think we have a question from Gerald. Are you there, Gerald?
Are you there?
Yeah, Gerald, do ask your question.
Can you hear me?
Yes, carry on.
Excellent. Charlie, first of all, very good to talk to you. I've enjoyed listening to your talk with Rhonda this morning, and you pretty much answered every question I had to ask you, which is slightly irritating. But I thoroughly enjoy your products, and it does stand out on the shelf in Sainsbury's when we go in there and decide to grab a fish pie or a curry, for instance. And I'm just wondering, how do you think you've managed to keep that sort of artisan look and taste to your product, whilst still wearing the badge of mass production? Because I was myself personally, if I start to move up to a giant roaster and roasting 80 kilos at a time in the drum and get into that mass market, I kind of lose what I set out to achieve. But that's probably related to coffee rather than perhaps what your product is, which is obviously good quality food. So that's really my query. I obviously want to keep growing. As you said, you should keep growing your business earlier, and I think 15% sounds pretty good. But I also want to make sure I maintain the quality.
Well, I mean, you've asked a couple of questions there. I mean, how do you keep the packaging looking artisan? That's obviously pretty easy.
Yeah.
How do you keep the sort of your ethos as artisan and small production? I think that's just a simple, as you grow, that's just a simple choice you have to make. I think the received wisdom on this is wrong. The received wisdom is, as you grow, you have to make compromises and do things in, it sounds like you make coffee in bigger and bigger batches and faster and cheaper and cheaper. That's what most people choose to do, but they've chosen to do that. You don't have to choose that. We've said, actually, as we've grown, we want to do things, still in small batches, still with real care and attention. And actually, so we've used, you do get some efficiencies that come to you through growth. And it's just a question of where you reinvest that efficiency. We've chosen to reinvest that in training our guys to be more skilled who are making the food, to have more time to, you know, to put the care and attention in, to spend more money on the ingredients, etc. So I think it's just a simple choice you have to make. It always strikes me as peculiar that most people make the wrong choice.
Yeah. So you're still very much on the shop floor. Are you still going in there, getting your fork and tasting the odd products as it comes out?
I eat a lot of our food every week, which is one of the joys of my job. And I spend a lot of time in our kitchens chatting to the guys who are making our food, because that's important.
Sure. Okay, well, that's very good to hear. So I'm kind of following along those same lines, or trying to, as much as possible. I mean, we deliver coffee in plastic buckets locally, which, you know, everyone gets delighted when their bucket's empty and they ring me up and say, can you replace our container, which I'm delighted to do, and I drive out there and replace it personally. So you keep that customer relation going. But we also use biodegradable packaging, which is costing us more money, but then, you know, I can sleep in my bed well at night, that I'm doing everything I possibly can. I've even gone to the eccentric extent of not using a bin liner in the bin and just putting in a coffee sack, which of course, you know, once it rots away, you can throw it in the bin, doesn't matter if it goes into ground fill, or if you're really sort of fanatical, you can take them home and wash them and reuse them. So yeah.
Good. Sounds like you're doing lots of great stuff. Carry on.
Do you drink coffee?
Of course I drink coffee. Who doesn't?
I'd love to send you some. Let me send you some coffee. For answering my question so well and speaking to you today. It's been a pleasure.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Gerald, very much. Good plug in there. I have to say, he's an expert coffee roaster locally to us. Okay, all right. So we have Susan, I think, going to ask a question now.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Carry on.
Oh, I just wanted to ask a simple question to Charlie as to what percentage of meals are now vegan that you currently produce?
Simple answer, 0%.
Interesting. Is there a reason for that?
Yes. Are you vegan? I don't want to offend you too much.
I'm not vegan, but I am vegetarian, and I have eaten your delicious meals before.
Okay. So, I mean, there are two reasons really. One is I think it's relatively easy to make absolutely delicious vegetarian food, and I think we do have some delicious vegetarian food, and I'm delighted to hear that you may have tried some of it. I think as someone who's absolutely loves food, and as a business which is passionate about one thing above everything else, which is things being delicious, making delicious vegan food is much harder. So I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's much harder. There are very few vegan dishes in my life that I've eaten and said, wow, that is amazing. So it's much harder. It's a much smaller market on practical terms. You know, you get different numbers on it, but broadly vegetarian might be 10% of the population and vegan might be 1% of the population. So from a business proposition, it's perhaps less clear. But actually, the thing I really dislike about vegan food, and here I can get on my soapbox, is that at the moment I absolutely hate the way that vegan food is being used as a sort of convenient label to hoodwink some people into eating the most processed and therefore, I suspect, the most unhealthy food, some of the most unhealthy food that is available today. To produce this fake meat, as I call it, is a process, you know, extraordinary process has to be gone through that denatures food. It takes it a long way from natural, and I actually think, I suspect, in the long term, is going to be found out to be hugely damaging to people's health. And I fear for people who are being conned into thinking they should be vegan and then eating this, you know, muck.
I think I can see where you're coming from, and I do agree. I think there is a tendency for them to throw a lot of sugar and salt still into vegan meals that I've seen. I have several friends that are vegan, so was just curious really. But if you ever need a vegan food taster, please give me a shout. And
Okay.
thank you for answering my question.
Thank you, Susan. And I think we have Mimi now. Another question.
Hi, hello everyone. So Charlie, I can remember buying my very first Bighams lasagna in Waitrose in Winchester it must have been 2011. And I've had many since, and I've had many of your meals, and I really enjoy them. I see them as sort of, like you said, a takeaway, an evening of not having to cook, but obviously much nicer. I much prefer your food to a takeaway. And really, I was just interested in the process over the years of your recipes. So you had the lasagna back in, well, almost 10 years ago now. And is there a process in retasting it, retesting it, maybe changing some of the ingredients as the time has gone on? And sort of if you could tell us a bit more about that side of your food production.
I think our approach could be summarised as relentless dissatisfaction. I think I'm very proud of the food we make, but I also know that every dish that we make, we could make better tomorrow than we do today. So it doesn't matter how good we think something is, we are relentlessly dissatisfied with it, and we are continually trying to improve it. And I think that's kind of, it's actually the way every business should be about what they do, whether it's producing service or products. You should always think, yeah, well, if we're doing an okay job today, how do we do it better in the future? So that's our approach, and then we have a kind of whole load of work that sits behind that, which involves chatting to consumers and doing lots of work ourselves. But yeah, relentless dissatisfaction, I think, is a good way to be.
I like that phrase. It's good to hear it. Check. Yeah. Thank you.
Mimi, was your question more about whether consumer taste has changed, or expectations of maybe, I don't know, spiciness or savoury flavours? Was that your question more?
Well, there is another line to it. I was sort of asking both. I was going to follow up, but yeah, I mean, that is a very something I'd be really interested in knowing is how maybe over, say, the past decade or even 5 years, how consumer tastes have changed. Have you brought out more curries or more sort of the classic British meals, or I don't know, has there been a movement that you've seen in that?
I think our tastes over time change much less than people think, and this is if you're talking about us collectively as a nation. I think that the dial moves very slowly. There are obviously some fantastic chefs, restaurants, people who want to be at the cutting edge and are sort of chasing the zeitgeist of whatever is next. And there are some amongst us who want to be challenged and go and try new things and be excited by that. But for the vast majority of us, actually, our tastes change relatively little over time, and hence, our best-selling dishes are fish pie and lasagna, which could have been the best-selling dishes, 20 years ago. In many homes, those would have been eaten, 20 years ago as much as they are today. So things don't change that fast. I think what has changed, though, and this has been to our benefit, and maybe we've even played a small part in making this change, is that I think people do now question a little bit more about where their food comes from, how it's made, and so that they care a bit more about that today, which is a good thing. And I think there's plenty more scope for people to continue asking the searching question, which is what price cheap food? Our food generally in this country is very cheap, and there are compromises that are made by the food industry that actually, if consumers knew about them, they would run a mile.
Back to your point, I think, Charlie, in the recorded interview where you talked about value, value rather than price, and quality. Okay, I had a couple of questions that came by email, so maybe I could ask those now if we've got no more waiting in the chat. So you said earlier on in the interview that the business is not risk averse. Where does that confidence come from? You know, you said that you were in a position where you really could take some risks. Where does that confidence come from, and how do you manage those risks?
Well, I think, you know, two areas, I guess. One is just a sort of self-belief in what you're doing, which I've had from the start. And I think anyone who sets up a business, you don't set up a business unless you've got some self-belief and that you think your idea is worth pursuing and worth working hard at. So that's a sort of underlying thing. And I guess over time, you know, one of my sort of mantras I probably bore the team with too often is I say that, you know, businesses are about making a profit. It's quite often, I think, seen by people who start their own businesses or in small businesses that profit is a bit of a dirty word. It shouldn't be a dirty word. You know, it is our job as a business to make a profit. And the reason I say to people that we need to make a profit is very simple, because profit equals freedom. It's only by being profitable as businesses that we're able to take risks. And that's kind of the whole point of it. Makes some money, and that enables you to push the boundaries, whether that's doing new stuff or just making the existing stuff do better.
Good, thank you. And do you think, just a follow-up question to that, has COVID and all of this situation actually made the business more resilient? You know, in terms of, if you like, having to really question again the way that you're actually delivering the business and managing it.
I think it's interesting. I mean, I sort of hesitate, you know, really to, you know, on the COVID front. I mean, we've just, through no, you know, cleverness or design on our part, we've just been incredibly fortunate in terms of we've just fallen the right side of the fence with COVID. But as I said, pure chance. You know I've got lots of friends who have businesses in the restaurant and hospitality sector who have had brilliant businesses. They were doing everything right through no fault of their own. They've had the rug pulled out from under their feet, and now they find themselves in crisis or worse. I think those businesses who found a way through, and I know a few who have, they've certainly proved themselves to be more resilient, but we haven't been tested in the same way. Yeah, we've had some stuff to deal with, as everybody has, but you know, the scale of challenge for us in what we've had to deal with is just insignificant compared to what many businesses have had to deal with. So I don't think it's fundamentally changed us.
Okay, thank you for that. There is a question in the chat which I will put to you, but see what you make of it. Kat asks, what sort of choices does the UK food industry make that means we have cheap food, not quality food?
Well, I think it's unfortunate. I mean, you know, it's unfortunate that the food shopping experience in this country is dominated by a very small number of players, as we all know, and they're obviously lovely. They're our customers, but there are only, you know, half a dozen places you can go and buy your food, really. And they have talked themselves into a corner where actually all of them talk about price above everything else as being the key reason to shop, to walk through their doors rather than through someone else's door. I think that's a great shame. I think it's a you know, it leads to all sorts of, you know, not good things. But of course, you know, what the UK supermarkets are incredibly good at is they give us as consumers what we want. So they go and talk to people and they say that people want to hear about price, and so they talk about price. And we're in this sort of, I mean, if I was, you know, maybe overstate it, but we're in this sort of doom loop of price becoming, you know, is the main thing that people talk about and care about, and therefore say they care about, and therefore it gets talked about more, and then they supposedly care about it more. and we've got to find a way out, because it's the enemy of quality, and it's the enemy actually of sustainability as well.
Good. Thank you for that. We're just going to run on for just a couple of minutes because we lost you. There is another question that came in by email, which I think is very relevant for smaller businesses particularly, is how do you separate out yourself from the business? You founded it, it's named after you, you have huge input into it, obviously, day by day, and obviously have a great enthusiasm for it. But what about succession and indeed sustainability? You know, if and when, I guess, the day may come when you have to step away from it.
Well, I think pretty straightforward. You know, everyone who sets up a business, and especially one for the long term, it's beholden on you to assemble an amazing team around you. And I'm very lucky. I have an amazing team who care very passionately about the business and what we do. And you know, and so they do. You know, the team do the hard work, and I just come in occasionally and I'm irritating. You know.
So I think it's time to wind up the Q&A now. So all I need to say is to say thank you, Charlie, very much indeed for being with us and for answering those questions. And all attendees, thank you very much for your input today. And it's obviously provided much food for thought. So goodbye to Charlie, and goodbye from the Minerva team. We'll be back in touch with you with news of our next occasional conversations soon as we've got those set up in the new year. And I think just one key message I'd just like to re-emphasise to all before we sign off completely is one last message is sustainability is for life. It's not just for Christmas. So thanks very much indeed, everybody, and hopefully see you all again soon. Bye.